Hey everyone, how you doing today? Well, this is going to be a series of 3 interviews. You want to watch all of them. Anna and I have seen the housing crash videos. We have seen Google searches saying, when is the market going to crash? What we have decided to do is break down all three in individual segments of how the real estate market could crash. So Anna, you ready for this?
I am ready and excited. I love this topic.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's a little bit of morbid curiosity. I think it's a little bit of recency bias. I think, well, first off, if it did crash, you and I would make a killing. Let's just be honest, right? So I got some hate mail the other day about it. Well, it crashed so you could sell more books. I'm like, trust me, if the real estate market crashed, I would be better off than a couple of dollars on a book. What are you talking about? It's people are silly. So let's talk
Yeah, no,
about
I'm excited about it because it's education, right?
yeah.
It's like, how do we become better investors? Whether you're just starting out or you get better, you learn from the past,
Mhm.
and then you use that to make wise decisions in the future to hedge what could or couldn't happen and how you would react when it does, right?
Absolutely. Just a great example of 30 years of discipline. Just today, we saw Wells Fargo and JP Morgan reverse their bad debt reserves, right? And it's funny, a year ago, I'm telling my folks, watch this, it's going to happen. They're going to reverse it, goose their numbers, blah, blah, blah. Sure enough, I'm like, I told you. So anyways, I digress. Uh, the first one I want to do is talk about the government. Everybody likes to talk about the government. And if you want to go back and research something, folks, in the 1980s, the Deficit Reduction Act was the overarching umbrella that was blamed for for a housing crash in the 80s. So Anna, one of the things that you and I both know is if the government wanted, they could attack real estate investors and they could change things on the edges, or they could go right to the heart of our business. And if they did, it would crash real estate. What do you think?
Yes, it could. And to your point, in the 80s, it did, right? And so I do think the optimist in me says most politicians, from what I've read, congressmen have real estate,
Mm-hmm.
because wise people that start to make money start to want a place to put it.
Right.
And, the no brainer, safe place to park money in the scheme of things has always been real estate, right? There's more millionaire real estate than anything else. And so I think there are enough people in Congress that they're not going to go for the jugular and try to crash it unless they just want eminent domain and they want to take it all, right?
Yeah.
And do we have a few on the very far left that would love to, take over all apartment housing and make it affordable? Yes. Do I think it's likely? I hope not. But with that said, there are things that they want to do to increase tax revenue, right? And given the fact that we are now printing trillions of dollars and going into additional in order to fund all of the things we are through the pandemic, they've got to find ways to increase tax revenue. And so real estate to date has had serious tax benefits that make it very attractive to us and keep prices fairly high, because we have the trade-off of, I might be buying when the market's a little high, but I'm getting 100% bonus depreciation and writing off all my losses, right? My capital gains are very, very low right now. And I have the ability to do a 1031 exchange. So if I want to sell one property, I 1031 into another. I'm doing that right now on a deal. And we have a stepped up basis for our family. So when we buy property, we pass away, we leave it to our heirs, there's a stepped up basis. All those things make real estate extremely attractive. And if you start to go for just tax changes, forget any other legislative changes, but you just go for the tax changes, it could make the risk adjusted returns that you make in real estate such that people look elsewhere for where they want to invest. That decreases the demand and that decreases the values.
Yeah, what I really want to make this episode about is the tax changes, because that's what happened in the 1980s. They basically wiped away the ability for rich, high W-2 earners, doctors, dentists, lawyers, to write off depreciation or losses against their income, right? That was essentially the big tweak, which again changed their risk profile. And it's like, well, it was good while it lasted. Let's get rid of these things. And they started selling and value started falling, and then we had a savings and loan crisis, and it just cascaded. You can go back and look to the tax changes that changed the profile of investors. It went from being a great investment with a purposeful return to being overpriced and not worth the headaches. I mean, that's what happened. And yeah, they could come in and do eminent domain and all of that, but it's so unlikely, at least at any scale, to be a real problem. But they could definitely come after tax changes. I think there's a couple things on the edges that I think are possible, but if you want to go to the heart of this, if I'm not saying the administration wants this, but if they wanted to get rid of real estate investors altogether, right? Just wipe them out, don't like them, blah, blah, blah. They could come in and do things like write off. They could cancel the write off of mortgage insurance. They could. They could get rid of depreciation altogether. They could, right? They could do they could raise taxes on earnings, right? The rent. It's just, they could do all those things. I'm not saying they are, but if they wanted to get nasty, they could do that. And I promise you, real estate would crash.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I already expect, Michael, and I'm starting to see this in the interactions that I have, especially with smaller mom and pop landlords, and also on some of the very large apartment complexes as well. Biden has essentially said, and it's in their tax proposal for 22, that they are going to increase the long-term capital gains rate significantly. And that in and of itself is already teasing a lot of people to say, we got to sell now while values are high, while we can close this year and lock in a shorter, smaller, much smaller capital gain. And so you're starting to see a lot of properties put on the market, but there's still so much demand that they're scooping them up, right? But once that capital gain is in full force, and we presume in 2022, I don't think they'll wait till 2023. I anticipate that change alone will cause two things to happen. Investors simply will not keep selling. They're going to just keep refining, keep improving their properties and holding on to them. So that will put out a little bit less supply, right? But it's also going to make other people think very carefully about whether they even want to get into real estate if they've got to hold their properties for a very long time and don't have the ability to have lower capital gains and the 1031. Now, the Democrats for a long time have threatened to take away the 1031 exchange, but they haven't done it. The question about whether they're likely to and how many of them would be impacted by that change is, anyone's guess. But I think that one and capital gains could both cause a significant dip, at least in certain, maybe commercial real estate more so than residential. But I think that we'll have a blip because of that. I don't think it's going to be a crash, but I think it will cause values to come down a bit.
Yeah, and something I should have said up front on the intro is define a crash, because I hate these words without definitions. I'm going to call a crash something greater than 20%, just to get off. And that's the same for all three videos, right? If it goes down 5%, I'm not calling that a crash. That's an adjustment. That's a slowdown,
right,
whatever you want to call it. So 20% is my bar for these three conversations. Yeah, I'm like you, right? I think capital gains, individual tax return changes, that makes, if you're in your 70s, right, and you see another 10 or 15 years of quality of life, you're going to use this year to be like, okay, I was going to sell in 3 years, I'll sell now, right? So I think some of that pulls forward, and then you're right. I think we get to next year and it doubles or whatever it does. And the beauty of real estate is I don't have to sell. I could just do a rate and term refi or cash out refi. And last time I checked, loans aren't taxable income. And and again, it's interesting. So I just think the economies change. I think that the 1031 is an interesting one to think about, right? Because I know why it's a target, but if you really step back and go, what's the goal, right? The government, at least currently, wants to incent affordable housing, right? It wants to send housing units. And one of the things that is wonderful, and I've used it many times, is that 1031 exchange, right? To go bigger, right? Move equity in an asset to something bigger. But if I was thinking, what would I do different if they eliminated that? And I don't know that it really slows me down at all. Maybe it hurts the people at the very big, right? Because I don't play in 100 units and above. Maybe that's where the 1031 would be felt. But mom and pop investors, going from a duplex to 6 units or 4 units to 20 units, which are both things I've done. I don't know I just don't think I do the trade. I think I stay where I'm at.
And I think that's the key is, for long-term investors, it's not going to make much of a difference. And, one of the things, even with crashes that I tell my students, I've got some people that are worried or people that just message me, do you think real estate's going to crash? Like, it's so overpriced. I can't believe you're still buying anything. And the reality is, because we're long-term buy and hold investors primarily, right? We can weather these economic changes. Typically, you go from peak to trough in 10 years, right? Give or take, have some type of recession every 10 years or so. And so I do have value add deals. And on my value add deals, I'm much more concerned of, if I'm going to buy something, I better not bank on thinking that it's just going to continue to go up, 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 sky's the limit for the next 3 to 5 years, when there are things like the tax code changes that could happen. But with my buy and hold investments, if I'm paying a little too much today compared to what I would have paid 2 years ago or would have paid in 2 years, I really don't care, because I'm holding it for 10, 20 years plus, or even for my children. And again, things change and they're tough when I want to sell. I intend to always maintain very good credit and be able to be bankable and do a cash out refi to take my cash out that way. So it's not going to impact me significantly. Where we really have to worry about these things like a real estate crash is when you're in it for the short term. You're flipping properties. You've got a bunch of hard money loans, and a crash happens, you're devastated, just like they were in 2009. So it's one of the main reasons that I really am not an advocate of transactional real estate, where you're constantly churning and depending on very quick turnaround to make a profit and have short-term loans on those deals. If you can buy long-term holds, put in fixed financing, long-term debt, you'll weather most of these storms and you'll figure out a new strategy to get around them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And yeah, I mean, go back to Dave Ramsey's story, right? Why is he so anti-real estate? Well, it's because he was doing short-term expensive financing 90 days or 180 days at a time, and it ate his lunch when the market turned, right? So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. But I guess the one thing I really want to highlight is we exit this government, right? If again, I go back to the fact that I don't think eliminating the 1031 or the stepped up basis are enough to crash real estate. I think those are changes at the edges. I think they change marginal things. I think they have to get punitive. I think they have to go back to like 1980 style, like, hey, I'm taking away one of the big goodies, like mortgage interest deduction, like depreciation altogether. If they got that punitive, I'm willing to tell you that real estate would crash, because shoot, I might sell everything. I was like, okay, well, that's not worth it anymore. I'm done.
Yeah. And I think we've seen a little glimpse of that although I'm sure that I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they have noble causes with the eviction moratorium, right? But the fact of the matter is that during this pandemic with the eviction moratorium, that has really strong-armed many landlords. More than 50% of investors only own 1 to 10 units. And so they're having to cover these mortgage payments while people aren't paying. And so I think if the government continued these types of pro-tenant, anti-landlord things like extensive eviction moratoriums, and if they put in federal rent controls of some sort, or even state, you could crash in a particular state because of legislative changes, even if the rest of the world doesn't, the rest of the country doesn't. But I think if you start caps on your ability to profit and raise rents in order to keep housing affordable, which is the big buzzword right now, all of these packages for pandemic and internationally, the UN, all these countries are saying affordable housing is like a number 2 human crisis next to climate change, right? So if they come in and limit our ability to raise rents to keep up with our expenses and maintain profitability, I think that has more likelihood of causing a major real estate crash in both the single family and multifamily space than even tax code changes.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll say on this, and we'll get on to episode number 2, I want people to realize when I talk housing crash in 20% and government changes attacking landlords, I want everybody to realize that in most markets, right, investments are 32%, owner occupants are 68%. So yes, they may attack investors, but when it crashes everybody. Everybody's value goes down. Everybody's underwater. It's not good for everyone. But again, if the government wanted to, I'm not saying they are, but if Google search housing crash, one answer is the government could cause it. Is that fair?
That's very fair.
Very cool. I look forward to number 2. Thanks.